we started last week, we see that Samuel had gone to the house of Jesse, and there he anointed David to succeed Saul as the future king. But David is still doing his work. He's going back and forth from going to the palace and to bring some kind of comfort, because the scripture said that Saul came into a distress from time to time. And they had advised him for him to calm him down was playing the music. And there was such a person that was really good playing the harp, and that was David. But in between that, David would go back to his father's house and he would do his regular job, which was tending the sheep. So, 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 1. It says, "Now the Philistines gathered their armies together to battle, and were gathered at Socoh, which belongs to Judah, and they encamped between Socoh, and I'll see if I can pronounce this right, Azekah, in Ephes Damium. And that Saul and the men of Israel were together, and they encamped in the valley of Elah, and drew up in battle array against the Philistines." See, the Philistines were one of the enemies around the Israelites, that they would come and consistently would come and bring war against Israel. There were other enemies around there, but the Philistines were the ones that always would come and fight against Israel, the children of God. Verse 3, it says, "The Philistines stood on a mountain on one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, with a valley between them." The valley of Elah. And the scripture says that the Philistines had a special weapon. They came up against Israel, and this time they brought a special weapon. And this special weapon that they came with was from the land of Gath. Now Gath is a country there where people of high stature were from Gath. Their champion, their secret weapon, happens to be no other than Goliath. They call this champion gigantic of a man. The scripture says that this man, this warrior, this secret weapon of the Philistines, measured 6 cubits in a span. That's nearly almost 10 feet high. 9 feet, 9 inches to be exact. So for a person to be that big, not only tall, but I believe that he was huge. Okay? Scripture says that he wore a bronze helmet on his head, and that he was armed with a coat that weighed 5,000 shekels of bronze. And depending on the size of the shekel, it could be anywhere from 125 to 200 pounds. Just on the coat that protected his upper body. And that he also wore bronze protectors. And he carried a bronze javelin. This bronze javelin, I could almost imagine to see the size. If he was almost 10 feet tall, that this javelin was probably the same height as him. And the scripture says that the point of this javelin weighed 600 shekels, approximately 15 pounds. So, this is the secret weapon. The scriptures say that every day, for the last 39 days, that the champion, here comes the Philistines, they're on one side of the mountain. We have Israel, King Saul and his men, his army, on the opposite side. And the scripture says that this champion would come and he would challenge Israel. He says, send me your best man, that I may fight with him. Scripture says that it went on, that he would come in the morning, and then he would come before the end of the day, he would come and challenge again. But there was no takers. King Saul and his men happened to see the stature of this man. They couldn't stand a chance against him. And one thing that they couldn't stand a chance with against him is because the battle that they were fighting was one-on-one. Goliath against any challenger. And this was for everything. For all the money, all the marbles. It was fight to the end. Whoever would prevail would then become the servants of the opposite. The Philistines were so confident that their champion was going to be victorious because he hadn't lost a battle yet. Verse 7, it says, now the staff of the spear was like a weaver beam. You see that big, giant spear. And I could just imagine that with that spear, that anybody that would come close enough, because of his strength, that he would swing that javelin with a reach 10 feet or so, plus the span of his arm. You're going anywhere between 13, 15 feet. So his opponent had no chance even to try to get close to him. You see, the scripture says that Goliath stood and he cried out to the armies of Israel and said to them, why have you come out to me and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and you the servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. Every morning Goliath came and he made a challenge and nobody would come. At the end of the day he'd do the same thing and still nobody would come. Can you imagine the Israelites at the end of the day, the last thing that they heard from this champion, this warrior? They knew that the following morning they were going to be facing the same. Can you imagine this to say, I wish there was someone that could stand up to this man. And see, they didn't want to risk confronting. I'm sure Israel had some a courageous man, but because what was at stake, nobody wanted to take that challenge. Nobody wanted to challenge this because if they lost, they had like a 1/10 of 1,000 chance of beating this man. So the odds were against him. They didn't want to be let known that he was going to be dead. He didn't have to worry about, but he was thinking ahead. And he says, I don't want for my family and all of Israel to become slaves again because I took the challenge. That was one of the things that Israel always made. And they looked at this champion and they didn't want to. As much as they wanted to, they couldn't do it. They wouldn't do it. It says, verse 9 says, and if he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then ye shall be our servants and serve us. They heard this for 39 days, twice a day. And when, verse 11, it says, verse 10, I'm sorry, it says, and the Philistines said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. And 11, it says, when Saul and all of Israel heard these words of the Philistines, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. I mean, can you just imagine being a soldier? See, a lot of times they went and they lined up in array to do battle because it could be like everybody was charged at each other and they fight one-on-one with that, you know. And they had more of a chance for everybody fighting everybody and to see who would prevail. But when it came down for only one, see, it was uncommonly that from time to time they would fight this way. And this was one of those times. Meanwhile, what there was happening back at the house of Jesse, Jesse's 3 oldest sons, Eliab, Abinadab, and Shammah, had gone out and followed King Saul. They joined the forces. They went to fight. And their father Jesse was getting concerned because he didn't know how the battle was going. He didn't know anything about his sons. So he became concerned. Over 5 weeks, 5.5 weeks, that he hadn't heard nothing. So he became concerned and he called one of his servants. He says, I want you to go and get David. So here, the servant goes and he goes to where David is and he's tending the sheep. And he goes and he says, Master David, your father has sent me to come and get you. He wants to talk to you. I see the look in David's concern. And his servant says, and don't worry, I will take care of the sheep. So here I see David taking off and he's wondering, I wonder what happened. Why would my father call me? Now he's concerned about the welfare of his father. So I see David hurrying to get home. He comes close to there and he's calling out to Jesse. Father, 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 where are you? And all of a sudden you hear Jesse says, I'm over here, David. Father, what is it? Your servant came and he said, you wanted to talk to me. He says, that's correct, David. Sit down. You know, it's been 5.5 weeks that your brothers went to fight, and I don't know anything about them. Just, I want you to go ahead, settle up the donkey, and I want you to take these supplies to your brothers. Take some grain and take these loaves to your brothers. And while you're at it, go ahead and take these 10 cheeses to the commander of the thousands. So David, I see David gathering up things. He's loading up the donkey with the supplies, and he takes off. The scripture said that he takes off early in the morning the following day, and he's on his way. So David goes to deliver the supplies. Verse 26. And David spoke when he got there. Okay? David gets to the camp on the 40th day. I say the 40th day. If you recall that when Jesus came and he was going to set himself before he went out and did his ministry, that he fasted for 40 days and 40 nights. So David gets to the camp, and David spoke to the man that stood by him, saying, what shall be done to the man that killeth this Philistine? I'll pause there because I'm just going to go back just a little bit. Because when David gets there and he's giving the supplies to the guy that is in charge of the supplies, he hears the challenge. David hurries and he gives that to them. He wants to go see firsthand that he sees and he hears Goliath. He spoke to the man that stood by him and saying, what shall be done to the man that killeth this Philistine, and taketh away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? 27. And the people answered him after this manner, saying, so shall it be done to the man that killeth him. And Eliab, his oldest brother, heard when he spoke unto the men. And Eliab's anger was kindled against David. And he said, David, he said, David, what are you doing here? But I know you too good. You came up to see the battle. And I believe that Eliab, like I say, the scripture says he became angry. And this might have started building up inside of Eliab, because when the youngest one was anointed to be the future king, Samuel thought it was going to be Eliab because of his physique. But God said, no, do not look at the outward appearance, because I know the heart. David had found favor in the eyes of God. So David is there and he's asking the guys, what becomes of this guy? To the guy that kills this uncircumcised Philistine. And they spoke and they told him again in the same manner. And at that time, says, can we get 29? And David said, what have I now done? When as Eliab asked him that way, in that manner, What are you doing here? He says, what have I done now? Is there not a cause? But see, David disregarded his brother, and he goes to see again, and he asks, what does a person get if he does this? See, one of the things that come to David is that when Goliath made this challenge, he started to defy the God of the armies of Israel. But when Goliath started to defy Israel's God, David took it very personal. And the reason I say that he took it very personal is because, see, David, while he was tending the sheep, while he was doing his job, he had all the time out there in the open that I see him playing the harp, making music, singing unto God. I see David playing the harp and he's dancing, and God is looking down on David, and it's very pleasing to him because David is playing to God. He says, I will take the challenge. And I see his brothers, and I see some of the men that says, well, I admire your courage. Look at you. I can see Eliab's look, and it says, boy, I just knew you were up to something. And see, some of the men that heard David speak like this went and told King Saul. And I see them coming to Saul as he's sitting there, and he says, your Lord, there's a challenger. There's somebody that's willing to go ahead and challenge their champion. I see Saul look. He says, tell me more, who is it? He says, well, I got to give him courage for it, but he's willing to do it. He says, well, go get him. So they go get David, and he comes in front of King Saul. We'll go to verse 32. It says, and David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine. And Saul said to David, thou art not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for thou art nothing but a youth, a lad. And you remember that they described when David came in front that he was ruddy. He was good looking, but ruddy, skinny guy, tiny. That the armature that Goliath was wearing probably weighed twice as much as David. He says, I admire your courage, but man, you can't go out there and fight him. There's a lot at stake at this. And David speaks. 34. Let me have verse 34. And David said unto Saul, thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion, and he took a sheep And a bear came and they took a sheep. When the lion came, I chased it down and I killed it. Then a bear came and he took a sheep and I followed him and I took the sheep after I killed it. Thy servant has both vanquished lion and bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be no different. See, one of the things that David was so confident, he knew that when that lion came, that he built up the courage. He was responsible for the sheep, that he went up and he fought against it. Now a bear, depending on what kind of a bear, there are some grizzly bears that are out, that when they stand, they stood as tall as Goliath, or maybe even taller than that. The strength of this bear, it says, if God has delivered me from the paws of the lion and the bear, he will deliver me from this Philistine. I see Saul becoming encouraged now. He didn't see the looks of David, but because of his words that came out of David. And see, one of the things is that David was so confident that God will deliver him again. Why was he so confident? If you remember that Samuel came, he anointed David as the future king. He knew that he wasn't going to get killed. Okay? So first of all, he had that confidence. God hadn't failed him yet. We sang about it a while ago. Saul says to his man, one of his servants says, get my armor and put it on David. He liked what he was hearing. His servant comes and he gets it and puts it on David, and David's just a tiny guy. Okay? Saul is 6 feet tall. The scripture said that he was good looking and tall. Compared to David, might have been about 5 feet. Probably no taller than yours truly. So he was small. So put it on his armor. Now that armor was too heavy. David could barely move. He says, I don't need this. He takes it off. He says, this is all I need. He was wearing a bag. And in the side here, he had a slingshot. This is all the weapons that I need. King says, as David says, go and may God be with you. He was pumped up. Saul was pumped up just hearing David. David gave a speech that he encouraged. Amen. Hallelujah. So let's go. David spoke with courage. He had a unique perspective, and that was God's. His brothers and Saul only saw the size of this giant. all that David saw was a slingshot. That was good enough a weapon, because with that weapon he killed the lion and the bear. So the boy felt confident because he had already fought a lion and a bear, and he had a victory. But he was so confident that, hey, if God has found favor in me and I am to be the future king, hey, I'm gonna win. How many of us have faced giants? I say giants because of a circumstance, of a situation that you might find yourself. Something that we can learn from David. See, when this came in David, he was just happy to go and deliver this and to bring word back to his father on the welfare of his brothers. While he was there, he happened to be the right timing, and he heard the challenge, and he remembered of what God had helped him. And I say God because he worshiped God day and night, in the morning, through the day, and the evening. He sang for God. The only thing that Saul and Israel and his brothers saw the size of this man, they became fearful. But see, David remembered. How many of you can remember back of a situation that looked too big, that was too big for you to confront and for you to overcome that situation? I'm sure we have at one time or another. A circumstance. Maybe you've gotten some final notices because of the situation, the economy, and maybe you've gotten a notice and it's to say, if you don't come up and bring this up to date, we have no other alternative but to foreclose on your property. Maybe you've gotten a final notice to say, hey, by the end of the day, we're going to shut all your utilities off. We're going to repo your car. Things that at that moment, there's no way that you can have a solution. But if you think back, if you were ever in a situation like that and you came over it, you overcame it. Why? Because on whom you trust. God. If God did it then, God will get you over this situation that you might be facing. David, it says he remembered. And he told King Saul, your servant has done this. So now I see David going into the battlefield. Goliath is there waiting to see if any takers. And I could just hear David, I'll take the challenge. I'll fight you. Goliath stands. I see him standing. It says, finally someone is going to come and fight against me. He got his attention, and scripture says that David goes and he gets 5 smooth stones from a brook that was there, and he puts them in his pouch. And he sees Goliath. He's not looking at his size. He just knows that that is the man that's in front of him. That is the enemy. God will get him over that. And he sees. See, and David was so good when he was out in the field that he practiced. Not only did he worship God in the morning, in the day, in the evening, but in his spare time for entertainment, he had to have a weapon to keep the prowlers away. That he practiced, and he practiced with that slingshot. He practiced. He put up a target, and he became so good that when he released that slingshot, he hit the target every single time. So he didn't need the armor, he didn't need the sword, he didn't need anything. All he needed was 5 smooth stones and his slingshot. And I see when David comes close enough, that Goliath steps in he's saying, oh, you gotta be kidding me. To send a boy to do a man's job? Goliath is looking at his sight, at his stature, and says, am I not a Philistine? Am I a dog that you send? You come with me with sticks? David said, oh man, he's just looking at him and says, Mel, you got your day coming today. Okay, let's see here. Steve, give me, let me have verse 45. It says, then David said to the Philistine, thou comest to me with a sword and with a spear and with a shield. But I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. 46. It says, in this day the Lord will deliver thee into my hand, and I will smite thee and take thy head from thee, and I will give the carcass of the host of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air, and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. The words of courage that David spoke to Goliath. Boy, you didn't know what you had coming today. It says, and all this assembly will know that the Lord saveth not with the sword and the spear, but the battle is the Lord's. Okay? Whose battle is it? It's the Lord's. See, David knew, hey, the battle is not mine. I don't care how big this guy is and I'm only half his size. I don't have to worry. All I have to do is stand and believe, because God is going to fight for me. He did it before. He will do it again. That was the confidence that David had. 48. And it came to pass when the Philistine arose, and he came and drew nigh to meet David. Now Goliath is mad, not only because they send a boy in front of him, says, you come to waste my time. You're going to pay. Because I'm going to kill you, then I'm going to feed you to the birds. He comes close to him, and that David, to meet David, and that David hasted and ran toward the army to meet the Philistines. Saul and the Israelites, they were at a distance, but yet they trembled. They didn't have the courage to come and even to try to take the challenge. But see, David came. Scripture says that when they were getting close, I see David running towards Goliath. I see Goliath coming towards David, that David takes his hand out of his pouch there and he loads up. He loads up his slingshot. And I see him twirling that slingshot. And I see Goliath looking at, and it's almost like, you know, that there's a saying, not that I've tried it or anything, maybe you've seen it, you heard it, when somebody, we call it, watch something and they come hypnotized, that I believe that when he was seeing David twirling that slingshot, I seen Saul following that, and all of a sudden David runs to him. He doesn't flee. He says, I'm going to get you close enough. He had his eyes focused on the target. Okay, the scripture says that Goliath wore a bronze helmet on his head. And I believe that at the time when he was taunted by David, a boy, that he probably took his helmet off and says, oh my God, I don't even need this. He opened up the target that David was seeking, and he goes and he swirls, and boom! David was so good, the scripture says that the stone hit him right between the eyes, and David looks at him. The Philistines look at him, that he stopped, says, why is Goliath stopping? They didn't see what happened. All they see, Goliath stop in his tracks, like in slow motion. He falls. I see the Philistines, get up, get up, get up. And Goliath falls on his face. I see David. David's coming and says, say, okay, I'm going to do what I told you were going to do. But see, David didn't have no weapon. All his weapon was that how was he going to kill this giant? He knocked him out. He was knocked out. And remember, David said he was going to cut his head off. He runs to Goliath and he sees Goliath there. And scripture says that he pulls the sword of Goliath. And I see Goliath going over and he stabs. David stabs Goliath. And he said, okay, I'm going to finish you off what I said I was going to do. And I see him, boom! And off comes the head of Goliath. And I see David picking up the head. Put his foot on his chest of Goliath. And he shows it to the Philistines. Here is your champion. You are our servants. When they heard that, the scripture says that they started to flee. Now we see Israel coming in for the kill. How many of us have sometimes seen, we see a movie and all of a sudden, where's the police at? Where's the help? And when it's almost over, you hear the sirens coming. Israel now know that can go in there. They didn't have to worry about the champion. David took care of it. They had the victory. The scripture says that they fled and they chased them. And meanwhile, after it was all done, that they came back. The scripture says that David, he goes with the help of some of the men there. I see that they take the armor of Goliath. And he takes this to his tent. and he lays it up. It's a reminder that anybody that will walk by there, anybody that will come and see that, there's the champion. And not only that, that David took the head of Goliath and he took it to Jerusalem. Here is the enemy. Now, how many of you can come up and you can go ahead and be like David? When a situation arises that we can step back, remember what God has done in the past. If he did it then, he will do it again. That is the God that we serve.